Hello, my dear friends, and welcome to episode 4 in my series on For Hope 25. This one is entitled The Triumph of Hope, the Resurrection in Matthew. And I do encourage you to go to chapter 28, verses 1 to 20 in the Gospel of Matthew. It's the final chapter of the Gospel of Matthew, and it serves as the climactic moment, not only in Jesus' earthly ministry, but in God's grand redemptive plan, as told through this particular gospel. Here, the resurrection of Jesus is more than a supernatural event. It is the anchor of Christian hope, the assurance that death does not have the final word, and the foundation for a transformed mission and identity for all the disciples, including you and me. And as we reflect on these 20 verses, we see how Matthew crafts this scene not just to recount history, but to instill an enduring hope for readers in every age. Matthew's Gospel, you may recall, begins with hope, the genealogy of Jesus. It traces God's providence through Israel's history, ending with the birth of Emmanuel, God with us, in chapter 1, verse 23. Yet throughout the narrative, a tension builds between this divine promise and the rejection that Jesus faces. This starts really from Herod's plot to kill the infant Christ to the crucifixion at Golgotha. And Matthew's account does not shy away from suffering, betrayal, and of course, death. The crucifixion in Matthew 27 is brutal and it's final. Jesus in verse 46 of chapter 27 dies forsaken. He's buried in a sealed tomb in verses 60 to 66, and he's watched over by guards. For the disciples, hope seems to have been extinguished. But chapter 28 of Matthew breaks the silence of the tomb and declares that hope has risen. When we look a little bit closer at chapter 28, and especially we look at the first 10 verses, there is an invitation in the empty tomb to believe. After Sabbath, at the dawn of the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to look at the tomb. This is in verse 1. The chapter opens quietly. It's really good, isn't it? That God is quiet. It's sort of not this explosive, hi, I'm back. No, it opens very, very quietly with the two Marys coming to the tomb at dawn. And we can read in the account that their grief is palpable. They come not expecting resurrection, but they come to mourn. Yet what they find is an empty tomb, a divine earthquake, and a heavenly messenger. He is not here. He is risen, just as he said, the angel says to them in verse 6. These words are the turning point. The angel reminds them that Jesus had indeed foretold this moment, just as he said, the angel says, pointing to the reliability of Jesus' promises. The resurrection is not a surprise twist. It's a fulfillment of Jesus' consistent teaching in Matthew's Gospel, in fact, in all the Gospels. Jesus has repeatedly prepared his disciples for his death and resurrection. And I'm thinking in chapter 16, verse 21, chapter 17, verse 23, and of course, chapter 20, verse 19. The angel now invites the women, and in some sense, inviting us to come and see, and then go quickly and tell. That's in verses 6 to 7 of this final chapter. This dual movement, witness and then mission, characterizes the new life birthed at the resurrection. Hope in Matthew 28 is therefore not abstract. It touches real people in their grief. The women leave the tomb. Yes, they are afraid, but as verse 8 says, they are filled with joy. And it's a powerful tension, isn't it, that defines resurrection faith. Hope does not erase fear, but it transforms it. Then, as if to confirm their testimony, Jesus himself meets them. "Greetings," he says to them. They come to him and they clasp his feet and they worshipped him. That's in verse 9, isn't it? This is the first post-resurrection appearance in Matthew's Gospel, and it's to women, marginalised figures in ancient society. Matthew emphasises the unexpected witnesses of the resurrection, underscoring that hope is given not to the powerful, but to the faithful. Jesus repeats the instructions of the angel. Do not be afraid. Go and tell. The use of "my brothers" here in the verse is a poignant moment of reconciliation. Despite all their desertion, Jesus calls the disciples his family. Resurrection not only conquers death, it restores relationships. In contrast to the joyful proclamation, Matthew inserts in verses 11 to 16 a very sobering interlude. The cover-up by the chief priests and the guards. Together, they concoct a story that the disciples stole the body while the guards slept. That's in verse 13. This false narrative is designed to sow doubt and to try and undermine resurrection faith. And in fact, that's what has been happening ever since. There's been this constant undermining of resurrection faith. But why include this episode? Matthew is aware that resurrection is not universally accepted. Faith in the risen Christ will always face resistance, whether in the form of rational skepticism, political manipulation, or spiritual opposition. Yet by placing this story between the two resurrection appearances, Matthew shows that the lies of the world cannot bury the truth of the empty tomb. Hope is fragile, but thankfully it is also resilient. And hope must also be guarded against deception, but hope is always grounded in divine revelation, not human rumour. Then in verse 16 to 20, Jesus commissions the hope bearers. The 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain where Jesus had told them to go. That's in verse 16. And despite their failures, the disciples obey. They go to Galilee, a region symbolically linked to the nations and to Jesus' earthly ministry. That's back in about chapter 4, verses 15 to 16. Here in Galilee, they meet Jesus on a mountain, a location rich in biblical meaning. Think of Mount Sinai or the Mount of Beatitudes in chapters 5, 6, and 7 of Matthew. And this is what I love in verse 17 of 28. When they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. Even in the presence of the risen Lord, some doubted. Matthew does not idealize the disciples. Hope and doubt can coexist. What matters is they are present, listening and worshipping. Then Jesus gives them the Great Commission, or as some in the church have said, the Great Omission. All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations. Actually, a better translation is, as you are going on your way, make disciples of all nations. So there's that sense of them going out all the time. Here is the resurrection's global implication. Because Jesus is risen, he holds all authority. The resurrection is not merely personal, it's cosmic. It vindicates Jesus as Lord of heaven and earth, and it demands a response, not just belief, but mission. The command, as you are going, make disciples, and that's actually the verb, the rest of it are participles, verbal nouns, if you like. But to make disciples is the command, and it's not a burden, but a calling born of hope. The gospel is too good to keep to oneself. The risen Jesus sends his followers, that's you and me as well, not as defeated refugees, but as ambassadors of resurrection hope. And Jesus then concludes, and surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. The chapter ends with a promise, Emmanuel, God with us, who was born in Matthew 1 and is still with us in Matthew 28. His presence is ongoing, spiritual and empowering. The resurrection as fulfillment of Matthew's theological themes are as follows then. Jesus as the new Moses. Throughout Matthew's gospel, Jesus is portrayed as the new Moses. He teaches on the mountain, he delivers the new law, and he leads people from slavery to freedom. The resurrection is the new Exodus, not from Egypt, but from death. Just as Moses led the Israelites out of bondage, Jesus leads humanity into the new life of resurrection, and resurrection seals Jesus' identity as the ultimate deliverer. Next, Matthew refers to, quite frequently, the kingdom of heaven. And this is the next theme. The resurrection is the moment when the kingdom breaks or starts to break fully into history. It marks the inauguration of God's reign over death, sin, and evil. This is why Jesus begins the commission with, "All authority has been given to me. The king has conquered and the kingdom has come." And then the next theme, of course, is discipleship and obedience. For Matthew, discipleship is not just belief, but also obedience. The Great Commission makes it clear. Teach them to obey everything that I have commanded you. That's in verse 20. Hope in the resurrection isn't passive. It fuels a life of obedience, sacrifice, and of course, mission. So why does the resurrection bring hope, even in Matthew? Well, first of all, hope beyond death. In a world plagued with suffering, war, and loss, the resurrection proclaims that death is not the end. Jesus has gone into death and returned. The tomb is empty, alleluia. And this fact transforms funerals, hospital rooms, and quiet moments of grief. Resurrection hope says, your sorrow will not last forever. Think back to the Beatitudes. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall rejoice. Hope for the guilty is also there as well. Peter denied Christ. The other disciples fled, yet Jesus calls them his brothers and sisters and sends them on a mission. This is the hope for the guilty, the ashamed and the failed. The resurrection says you are not disqualified. Because Jesus lives, there is forgiveness, restoration, and purpose. The other aspect of the resurrection hope is that even in opposition, we can have hope. Matthew includes the lies spread by the authorities, not to discourage, but to remind us that truth and hope will always be contested. Yet the resurrection was witnessed, recorded, and experienced by hundreds. I think St. Paul says over 500. Our faith is not blind. It is based on credible testimony and sustained by the Holy Spirit. The resurrection enables each of us to stand firm, even when the world denies it. The next aspect of why the resurrection is a great hope, and that is for the nations. Matthew, through writing to a Jewish audience, ends his gospel with a global vision. The resurrection is not just for Israel, but for all the nations. It affirms the dignity and destiny of every tribe, tongue, and people. In a fractured world, the resurrection gives us a unifying hope, a saviour for all. So what are we to make of that today? Well, Matthew 28 is not just the end of the gospel. It is the beginning of the church's mission. The resurrection of Jesus is the centerpiece of Christian hope, not wishful thinking, but a living reality. Remember back in my very first one, I talked about the difference between optimism and hope. Here we might think of, this is not about wishful thinking, it's not about optimism, but it's a living reality. It reshapes how we view death, failure, suffering, and our purpose. We live in an age still haunted by Good Friday realities, violence, injustice, despair. But Matthew declares that Resurrection Day has come. The tomb is empty The King is alive and he is with us always. So then let us live as resurrection people, joyful in suffering, bold in witness, confident in purpose, and grounded in unshakable hope. For Christ is risen, alleluia. He is risen indeed, alleluia. The Lord be with you.